Our final speaker this afternoon is Matt Tejada. We were fortunate to hear from him this morning. For those of you who weren't here this morning, Matt is the director of the Office of Environmental Justice at EPA in DC. But before that, he was executive director of Air Alliance Houston and focused on environmental justice issues in some of the most vulnerable communities in the Houston area.
Thank you. So I said I said everything I know this morning. So I don't really have a whole lot of new things to say. I did want to say just a few things. So I would disagree with Doug's excellent presentation on one point, that should a state not create a state plan, we will impose a federal plan. I would say that if a state does not create a state plan, it will have chosen to accept the federal plan. That's how we like to characterize things. But we're not allowed to bet inside of federal properties. Otherwise, we would have a pool in DC where everyone would be betting on how many states don't or do, because nobody really knows. We really don't. We're interested to see, though. We recognize, though, and I hope folks appreciate, as Doug was saying as he was going through his presentation, and as John said at the very beginning of his, and as I said this morning, this is the most flexible, responsive piece of government craft you've probably ever seen. It is trying, we are trying to look in every corner of the Clean Air Act to give states and industry and utilities the maximum amount of flexibility afforded under currently available statute to make a plan that works for the state. The federal plan is never going to be able to work as well as a state plan because we have to write a very general plan that could be applied anywhere. We don't know where. So we really do want states to be able to write their own plans and put those plans in. That first deadline, however, is very much right around the corner. September of 2016 is pretty quick to turn around the initial filing. We'll see if any states actually choose to do that, if they can create those plans by then. But we do expect to see folks come in with requests for extensions. And we will very much be looking at a number of the issues that Doug brought up, such as the leakage question, wanting to make sure that states are addressing things such as leakage when they actually bring the whole plan in. For the extension request, we will be looking at the engagement, the meaningful involvement of community groups and of communities themselves around each state, paying particular interest to low-income minority populations, vulnerable populations, which would likely or could potentially face some sort of an impact coming out of the choices that a state would make. We want to make sure that states are talking to those communities. We want to make sure that those voices have a seat at the table. So that will be a huge part of what we are looking at when those extension requests start to come in. And we have a lot of folks who are going to be dedicated to fielding those requests and really trying wherever we can not only to afford assistance to the community groups, which we're doing. We're actually holding we just held one in Port Arthur a few weeks ago. We're going to have another big one in DC. I believe it's scheduled for December 15th and 16th, if I'm not mistaken, where we are doing training for community organizations to get them ready to interact meaningfully with their states. By the same token, we've been working with ECOS and with a number of state groups to try to prepare the states to know how to meaningfully engage with communities. We are trying to play any role we can to facilitate that relationship building, those conversations, because we think it is important. We think it's crucial to the crafting of those state plans. Doug was also very right in saying that the energy efficient building block was taken out of proposal to final in the plan, but you can absolutely use energy efficiency, just as he described, in every way of actually complying with the plan. We recognize the very important place of energy efficiency in reaching our carbon goals, and we do expect to see it in a lot of plans. He was also very right in the whole auction question, which I know a lot of folks have talked about with establishing the market and establishing the credits, and some of the criticisms we've heard from that. There is this thing called the Treasury, and when somebody gives the government money, the Treasury hates it if somebody else says it's theirs and doesn't go to Treasury. So that's a real consideration that we had to make in the crafting of the rule. Also with the Clean Energy Incentive Program, which is just a couple weeks away from closing the deadline, although it's not a hard deadline because it's not a regulatory deadline. And we have had some requests in to try to extend that. We haven't officially responded back on extending the deadline for the Clean Energy Incentive Program extension requests. But there are a lot of questions in there that we want to try to craft that program as closely as we can so that there's an incentive there for energy efficient programs to get into the low-income communities where otherwise they might not. There was a question earlier about how far back we would go towards counting things. It's not much of an incentive program to hand out rewards for things that people would have done anyway. We want to hand out rewards for things that people would need a little incentive to do. They would need a little boost, a little more of a market incentive to actually go and put a project into a community or put more of a project into a community that otherwise they would not have. So that's the kind of sweet spot we're looking for between rewarding something that would have happened anyway, but on the other side, not wanting to forestall projects for several years that with just a little bit of encouragement or a little bit of a cleared path could start to get implemented sooner. So we're trying to come in between those two places, if that makes sense. Because we don't want things to be delayed unnecessarily just because they're waiting for the promise of something several years down the road. I think that's really all I have to say. I think we can go to questions and answers. Doug and John did such a great job. It was great hearing John's rundown of what's actually happening here in Texas. I think that's really exciting. So I look forward to questions and answers.